And I guess before we do the break, I guess in this first part of class, I just want to get eventually, we got a lot of stuff to kind of to start off with, but eventually I want to focus in on and iron in on what Kant means by the beautiful. When we say something is beautiful, what is that? What sort of judgment are we making, and what makes it distinct from other types of judgment? That's going to be the focus here before the break. And then after the break, I hope we'll have some time. We can get all that done before the break, and then after the break today, we can talk a little bit more about the genius, the artistic genius, and what Kant thinks of as the artistic genius, what makes somebody a genius, etc. And I don't think we might even just skip this because I don't know if it's that important, or we might just save it for next week. But we might talk a little bit about how Kant ranks all the different arts. This is a popular theme, which I honestly think is kind of silly. You know, like which of the art forms is the greatest? Remember Aristotle saying that tragedy is better than epic poetry, and he gives these arguments. And so Kant's going to do a similar move at the end of the chapter that we're looking at here. And I might just skip it, but we'll see. We'll see how our time constraints. What that sort of leaves us with at the end. So anyway, so this is the quote I sort of, this is where we ended last weekend. And, Kant is just distinguishing here in the quote between when I look at a building and I see it as a good building functionally, like it's well designed for a purpose, that's different from it being aesthetic. This judgment of taste. He says that this refers to a feeling of pleasure and pain that involves the whole being. But then, and I told you this last week to be careful with this. Then he wants to say that it's disinterested. Okay, so even though as something might be aesthetically pleasing, and Kant will allow you that locution, you can say that. Okay, I looked at this landscape, I saw that sunset, it was aesthetically pleasing. But we have to be careful. It's not the sort of pleasure that you're going to attach to a kind of physical satisfaction. It's a sort of disinterested, not uninterested, but it's not selfish. It's not based on your own personal needs or desires or wants. You're just looking at something and just saying, oh, wow, that's well designed. That is aesthetically, this building, let's go back to that last image. That's a cool looking building. It might actually not be functional. Who knows? Maybe you go inside of it, and because the roof is curved a certain way, it looks cool, but maybe it doesn't really, it's hard to keep it cold keep it warm during the winter or something. Like the aerodynamics don't work for actually habitation so well. It just looks cool. So from a pure aesthetic point of view, that's what we're looking at for Kant. We're not asking, like, does it make me feel good in a certain sense, like physically feel good, but is it just pretty well organized aesthetic? And this is something I get at through mere observation, right? And it's not an interested observation. There's no sort of personal bias that I might have towards it. In a way, this is somewhat what Hume is saying in his essay. We remember back to Hume that he says that often our own personal biases will get in the way of us enjoying art. But for Kant, I think it works out a little bit differently. We'll see later on in the essay. But let's go ahead. I didn't read this last week, so let me go ahead. I'm going to read this quote, and in a way, I think he just elaborates more on what I just said. But let's hear it from the man himself. He writes, if anyone asks me if I find that palace beautiful which I see before me, I may answer, I do not like things of that kind, which are made merely to be stared at. This may all be admitted and approved, but we're not talking about this. We only wish to know if this mere representation of the object is accompanied in me with satisfaction, however indifferent I may be as regards the existence of the object of this representation. Okay, so this example, maybe this is like the understatement of the year, but Kant is not very clear here. When he uses this example, if someone asks me about a palace, for instance, and I say, I don't like things of that kind, which are just made to be stared at, he's thinking of somebody maybe who is judging the palace ethically. making an ethical judgment. Why do people waste all this money on all this opulence? Look at all the gold and all the paintings. I mean, sure, it looks pretty, but I mean, think about all the peasants who had to starve so the king could build that palace. Think about all the people who had to suffer so that they could build this beautiful thing. And Kant's, he's kind of saying, well, yeah, you've got a point there, but I'm not asking you about, your moral disposition towards this object. I'm asking you whether you think it's well built or whether it's beautiful. Is it pretty? Does it satisfy that part of your cognition? Not your moral judgment, but just your aesthetic judgment. This purely disinterested. That would be an interested. I'm interested in who built this, why they build it, what was the reason for it. For Kant, that has nothing to do with judgments of beauty. Some people, you might look at someone who is very attractive, but you don't like them personally, and you're like, they're ugly. I don't like that person. They're ugly. Like, I don't like that person either, but they're not ugly. They're very, they're a model or celebrity or whatever, right? You can think of maybe that'd be an example of this, right? Kant's going to say, no, I'm not asking you whether you like the person. They might be abhorrent to you, but yeah, they're still pretty, right? Or something like this. This is, for him, beauty is something that is detached from moral judgment and also judgments of the good, which we'll see, what's the difference between that. He's thinking of like this Platonic abstract good. We easily see, let me read this quote real quick. We probably don't have to say much about it because I think he's just expanding a bit on what's been said already. We easily see that in saying it's beautiful and showing that I have taste, I'm concerned not with that which in which I depend on the existence of the object, but with that which I make out of this representation in myself. So, if I'm looking at the building, I'm not thinking about like whether or not I want to live in it, or whether or not it would be good for me to habitate it, or whether or not I approve of the people who built it or disapprove of them. I'm just thinking about how does it look to me, right? How I've got this representation in myself. I've got this experience of this object, and just as a bare experience without any sort of attachment, just the experience in itself. Is it aesthetically pleasing? Right? You might not like the queen, but does the queen have a good dress? Right? That's basically, these are two different questions, okay? So everyone must admit that a judgment about beauty in which the least interest mingles is very partial and not a pure taste, a judgment of taste, right? If you hate the queen's guts, you can't stand the queen. She killed your family or something like that because she had something against you, so she used her power to kill you. It's gonna be hard for you to look at that dress, however fabulous that dress is, and actually be like, damn, that's a fabulous dress. I hate her. Can't, dude, those earrings, that's nice. Like you can't, it's hard for you to do that. So for Kant, a pure aesthetic judgment has to be sort of, taken, from that distant, disinterested. You might even think interested from a distance. It's not that you're uninterested. It's just that you're making a judgment purely on the thing itself and how it's presented to your understanding, to your representation, right? In your mind, basically. How are you experiencing it? So we must not be the least prejudiced, but we must be quite indifferent in this respect in order to play the judge in things of taste. The pleasant, okay, now we're going to start differentiating between the pleasant, the beautiful, and the good, right? The pleasant, that which pleases the senses. This is what Hume would base all judgments of taste on. All judgments of taste for Hume, beautiful, whatever anything we think is good, it's all based on our experience of what pleases, okay? But Kant is going to say, no, this is something different. That which pleases the senses in sensation is pleasant, hence the opportunity presents itself of censoring. So he's going to censor, Kant is, this common confusion of this double sense of the word sensation. So in a certain sense, he's going to kind of allow Hume to do this, but we have to distinguish between these two senses of sensation and what we mean by it, right? And where the confusion arises and why pleasant is different from beautiful, even though they both involve the senses. Okay, so he says, what is the common confusion? Let's call attention to it. If a determination of the feeling of pleasure and pain is called sensation, this expression signifies something quite different from what I mean, what Kant himself means from when he calls the representation of a thing sensation. For in the latter case, the representation is referred to the object, in the former simply to the subject, and is available for no cognition whatever, not even by the subject which cognizes itself. So what's he saying here? If I'm talking about something that pleases me in the Hume sense of the word, this is something that is in me that makes me like something, right? Sorry, I keep getting interrupted by people in the waiting room, so I'm gonna have these weird pauses every once in a while to click them in. You know how it goes. But anyway, so in the latter, so let me read this last line. In the latter case, the representation is referred to the object. In the former, simply to the subject. So for Kant, his meaning is in the object. The object itself elicits a response. And whether I'm this person or that person, whether I hate the queen or love the queen, I'm going to see that dress and I'll be like, yeah, that's a pretty badass dress. Like, I might say it begrudgingly, or I might say, yes, I love the queen. I love her. She's got good taste. Or I'm like, oh, I hate the queen, but yeah, she's got good fashion sense, right? Those judgments, Kant's going to say the object is eliciting that judgment. It's not a subjective thing. Well, it is kind of a subjective thing. This is where it gets a bit gray. It's the term that Kant uses, and we'll get to this in about 2 or 3 more slides. It is subjectively objective. Okay, so my experience of this object might be different than your experience of it because we're different people, and we might even have certain different proclivities. You might like certain types of music more than I do, but we're both going to recognize certain patterns in it that stimulate our mind in a certain way. And that's going to be universal. And so for Kant, he's going to say that's something that the object is doing. That's not something that, so anybody that sees it is going to have that sort of a reaction. Whereas something pleases you, you might say that I love, I like chocolate ice cream, and someone's like, well, I like strawberry ice cream, right? And for Kant, that is subjective. That is, ice cream is something that has to do with completely, your judgment of taste in the completely purely subjective sense. This is not beauty for Kant. This is not the same thing as the experience of beauty. The beauty is going to affect all minds in a similar way. We'll all have our own experience, just like we normally do. We always have our own experience. It's our experience. But what happens is that object out there, that object of beauty, triggers something in our mind, some process in our mind, which, again, we're going to get to this in just a moment, that would happen no matter what. In fact, this quote here probably, again, more repetition. In the above elucidation, we understand by the word sensation an objective representation of sense, and we shall call that which must always remain merely subjective and can constitute absolutely no representation of an object by the ordinary term feeling. That's something I kind of glossed over when he said this at the end. He says, I can't even cognize this myself. He says, so it can't, so when it's something purely subjective, like if I like chocolate ice cream, even though that's subjective, it's not a representation of an object. It's just a feeling. For instance, if you don't like chocolate ice cream, there's no way I can explain to you why I like it and why it's good. If you don't already, I'm like, oh, it's sweet, it's rich, it's, if you don't like it, you're not going to like it. And if somebody asks, well, why do you like it, Travis? Why do you like it? I'm like, well, I just do. I don't know. I just like it. You don't decide what pleases you in this sense. It's not that's not quite the case for Kant when we're talking about objects of beauty. Okay, because even though it does elicit certain feelings in us, there is something about it that is objective in all cases. Right? We're almost there. We're getting to this pretty quick. In fact, I think I might even just skip over the last part of this quote here, because he uses an example of the green in the field, right? So like the green in the field, if I'm standing here looking at the green field and I'm a human being, I'm going to see green. Okay, now if I'm another kind of animal, I might see a different color because my eyes are different. I have a different light spectrum or whatever. But most human beings that are going to have like a 20/20 eyesight and that aren't colorblind, they're going to look and they're going to see this field and they're going to see green as well. Whether or not they like it and whether it makes them feel good, that is subjective. Okay, so the pleasant, what Kant now is calling the pleasant, not the beautiful, the pleasant, is bound up with interest. So it's not this purely aesthetic judgment. It's not a judgment of beauty because it's interested. It's attached to my feeling. That a judgment about an object by which I describe it as pleasant expresses an interest is plain by the fact that by sensation it excites a desire for objects of that kind. If I like chocolate, I am drawn towards if I see a big chunk of dark chocolate, on the table over there and I'm hungry, it's going to excite something and let me drawn towards it. That's definitely not a disinterested judgment. So consequently, the satisfaction presupposes not a mere judgment about it, but the relation of its existence to my state, so far as it is affected by such an object. Hence, we do not merely say of the pleasant that it pleases, but that it gratifies. I give to it no mere assent, but inclination is aroused by it. And in the case of what is pleasant, in the most lively fashion, there's no judgment at all upon the character of the object. It's not the object, it's how I'm experiencing it. It's completely subjective. Again, kind of getting repetitive here. Now he's going to say the good also is something different. So not only when we say something is good, not only when we say something is pleasant, is that different than saying it's beautiful, but if we say something's good, that is something different as well. So this would be a knock against Plato. I suppose all that stuff about pleasing could have been interpreted as a knock against David Hume and David Hume's approach to aesthetics, right? Whatever's good and whatever's beautiful is just what pleases us sensually. It's completely subjective, but since we're all humans, we have more, similar enough taste so that the best works of art, the greatest works of art, almost universally please. And so that's where our standard of taste comes from. But again, Kant's going to say, no, that's too subjective. What we call beautiful, it's not just beautiful for me, it's something that we assume others will find beautiful as well. Maybe for different reasons, given their own experiences and their own proclivities, but they're going to have a similar mind-blowing experience. Their mind is going to react in a similar way to these works of art. But also so not only is he different from Hume, now he's showing that he's different from Kant. He's different from Plato. Kant is different from Plato, because for Plato, the beauty is what is good. The good is the highest of all forms, and everything else below it, including the other forms, are explained in terms of it. And so, if something is beautiful, it's good for Plato. But Kant distinguishes goodness, being good, however you slice it, as different from being beautiful. These are different concepts. So let me read the quote here. Whatever by means of reason pleases through the mere concept is good. So he's defining it pleases through the concept. Pleases is, I think, even too strong verbatim here. Does it really please you to understand that a circle has 360 degrees? A good circle has 360 degrees to it. A bad circle is off by a little. A good triangle has got, all the angles add up to 2 right angles. I don't know if it pleases you. It fulfills a preconceived notion of what a idea of that kind is. That which pleases us as a means we call good for something, the useful. So that's an instrumental good. You've got something, some things are good just because they fit a preconceived notion. If I have an idea of again, I think geometrical shapes are the easier examples. A triangle has always got 3 sides and the angles add up to 180 degrees. If I'm able to construct, a figure of that, it's a good triangle, right? If it's off by too much, then it's a bad triangle. That's not an instrumental good. It's just good based on a concept, right? But then there's instrumental goods. These are sort of like Aristotle talked a lot about these. Aristotle bases all of his art or his judgments about art on instrumental goods. Was the play good for what it was designed to do? Its telos, its function, its aim. Was the tragedy able to elicit those emotions? But for Kant, that's not going to work either. These are both tied to either a concept, a preconceived notion of this experience of the triangle shape fits my preconceived idea of the perfect triangle or something. That's not right. And also an instrumental good, being good for something else, because it's tied to maybe my subjective needs, my desires, my wants. I need to you know, let's say I'm building a building. I need to put an extra pillar here or else the roof is going to cave in. That is not an aesthetic consideration. That is a structural consideration. So I'm thinking about, is this pillar going to be good for the building structure? Not is it going to look good? Is it going to be pretty? It actually might make it look cluttered. Oh, there's already too many pillars. Yeah, but we need one here because otherwise, you know, there's not enough support for this amount of surface on the roof, on the ceiling. So for Kant, he says these both involve some sort of satisfaction, and so therefore they're interested. They're not disinterested. So whether we're talking about just an abstract conceptual good, a la Plato, or an instrumental good, you could say like a la Aristotle, those are both bound up with interest. He says, in order to find anything good, I must always know what sort of thing the object ought to be. Again, this is how a perfect creme brulee should be, right? There has to be this preconceived notion. I must always know what it ought to be. I must have a concept of it. But there is no need of this to find a thing beautiful. So I don't need a concept. This is key for Kant. I don't need a concept, a preconceived notion of what is. I just see it and I know it's beautiful. It doesn't fill some already, it might be completely unprecedented even. It might be something I didn't expect to find beautiful, but yet it does affect me in this way. There's no need to find a thing beautiful. There's no need of this to find a thing beautiful. Flowers, free delineations, outlines intertwined with one another without design are called conventional foliage, and they have no meaning. They depend on no definite concept, and yet they please. Satisfaction in the good must depend on reflection upon an object that leads to some concept, however indefinite, and it is thus distinguished from the pleasant, which rests entirely upon sensation. So, right, if I think that this arrangement of flowers is beautiful, it's not because this arrangement of flowers fit some preconceived notion. I don't know anything about how to arrange flowers. I mean, if you put me behind the florist stand and told me to make a nice bouquet and I could pick any flowers I wanted, I'd probably throw a hodgepodge of crap together, and all the girls would be laughing their asses off at how clumsy my whatever you call it, my bouquet, vroom vroom, how clumsy my bouquet looked, right? But a beautiful bouquet, I don't know, maybe if you're a florist, you would push back against Kant. You'd say, no, there are rules, you have to put the baby's breath on the outside, and then you put the brighter colors in the middle, and then you put, you might say, no, there's rules. But I don't know, look at this picture. I mean, maybe you think it's kind of like one of these tacky looking posters you see in the dentist office waiting room or something, but it's colorful. I think it's really colorful, at least strikingly colorful. So if you want to say this is beautiful, this doesn't seem to have any patterns to it. It's not a preconceived notion of expectation that it fulfills. It's just, oh wow, that's really pretty. Look at all that. It could be a bunch of flowers in the field that are just randomly growing. But if it's, if I'm looking at it at the proper angle or whatnot, and I see it with, in a nice, bright, sunny day, that's beautiful. And it's not some preconceived concept that it's fulfilling for Kant. Okay, so I'm going to skip this. So I think that slide is just more redundant. He kind of recaps here: the pleasant, the beautiful, and the good. So these are three different kinds of satisfaction. They're all involving satisfaction, but only the beautiful is the disinterested. All the other ones have some sort of interest bound up with them. And so the judgments of beauty are the only ones that are purely aesthetic for Kant. So the pleasant, the beautiful, the good, they designate three different relations of representations to the feeling of pleasure and pain, in reference to which we distinguish we distinguish from one another objects or methods of representing them. That which gratifies a man is called pleasant. That which merely pleases him is beautiful. That which is esteemed or approved by him, i.e. that which he accords an objective worth, is good. Pleasantness concerns irrational animals also, but beauty concerns only men, i.e. animal, but still rational beings. So for Kant, human beings, because we are rational, because we are able to think in universal concepts, We're able to understand universal concepts, apply these concepts, make judgments based on these universal principles, act on principles. Because we're that type of a being, we're the only kind of being, he says, that can make judgments of beauty. All other beings, like this cat over here, is not thinking about how pretty that bird is, or how cute the bird is, or how pretty the bird is framed in the camera, how the camera frames the bird really nice. It's good photography, and I like the way the background is sort of out of focus. And that's not what the cat is thinking. The cat's like thinking, that looks like a yummy bird. Is that really a bird? It's big. I want to kill that bird, right? So the animal, right? The animal does not make the purely aesthetic judgment. That animal might have a desire, or for gratification there, but not be able to understand the aesthetic appeal. At least this is Kant's argument here. Okay? So let's sort of just get it, because I get confused too. I will probably mess up throughout this talk, because it's really hard the way he does this, and I don't. Sometimes I feel like this is a bit artificial. I kind of think that maybe there's something going on here. There are definitely differences between these type of judgments, but I think we're kind of loose with language, maybe more loose with language than we were in the 1700s when he's writing this stuff, because I think that we might talk about things being beautiful, but not really in the sense that he means here, okay? And I think we haven't really fully explained this yet. What the heck is beautiful? So let's sort of recap. So what gratifies is pleasant. That which merely pleases. Like I look at the flowers, I'm like, oh, they're pretty. I don't want to eat them. I don't want to go grab them and squeeze them and use them for like perfume or something. Like I don't want to they're just cool, man. Those are really pretty. I'm not gonna do anything with them, but yeah, I like that. It's enjoyable to look at. That's beautiful. And that which is esteemed is good. Okay, so we have a high esteem, that we have respect for somebody, gratitude. If we think that was a well done work, that was well executed, those are all judgments of goodness. But beautiful is just merely pleases us, which kind of confuses you, because then he says, well, the pleasant gratifies. The pleasant doesn't please. Well, it pleases you in a way that's interested. I guess we should clear that up. They all please us, right? The good pleases us, the beautiful pleases us, and the pleasant pleases us. But the beautiful pleases us in a way that is disinterested, not uninterested. Again, not like we're bored and like want to move on, but we just like it because we like it. We're not like this dog here, like just staring at that pork chop. We're not saying, wow, those grill marks are really nice. Like that pork chop might not even taste that good, but maybe it's like even a plastic pork chop, but they look like some real nice grill marks, and the seasoning's all caramelized on the top or whatever. But we might also be hungry. We might be thinking about eating that thing, unless we're like vegan or vegetarian or something. But but that would get in the way of the purely aesthetic judgment of the object for Kant. We may say that of all these three kinds of satisfaction, that of taste and the beautiful is alone a disinterested and a free, right? It's not attached to anything, needs or desires. It's a free satisfaction. For no interest, either of sense or of reason, forces our assent. Hence, we may say of satisfaction that it is related in the three aforesaid cases to inclination, to favor, or to respect. Now, favor is the only free satisfaction. Again, the language here, you could push back on this. When we say something is our favorite, that seems a little bit biased, but he's trying to use it in a neutral sense here. Inclination is like, I'm pulled towards the object. The way Plato talked about being pulled toward the beautiful, having a desire for beauty, having a desire to possess the beautiful. That's what love is. That's what eros is for Plato, is a desire for beauty. That's not right, says Kant. That's an inclination. That's drawing towards, you want to be gratified or satisfied in that sense. Favor is just like, oh, that's really nice. I think that's the best looking one. That one's nice too, but this is better, obviously. Well, I mean, I think that's what we're just talking about the way it looks. I mean, nothing has any actual value that needs to be respected. That's a moral judgment. Respect, I respect his character. I respect him as a person. I respect her as an intellectual. She's very smart and says all these great things. And, that's different than saying, oh, which is my which one do I favor? Again, I'm so favorite isn't personal. I know. I don't know what word could he use. I don't know why he uses, maybe the German word. I should get like the German edition and read to see, maybe there's a better translation for, I doubt it though. They probably would have come up with something better. But yeah, he's saying like favorite isn't personal. It's like you favor it simply because of it's the best looking one or something. Favor is the only free satisfaction. An object of inclination is one proposed to our desire by a law of reason, and it leaves us no freedom in forming for ourselves anywhere an object of pleasure. All interest presupposes or generates a want, and it leaves the judgment of the object no longer free.
What about
yeah, go ahead.
Affinity? Wouldn't that be a good word?
What's that? What's the word?
Affinity.
Affinity, yeah, I think that might be slightly better, but even that kind of has, like, I think favor and affinity, it almost sounds just like inclination, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not, I don't know, like, I would say maybe approve is maybe a good one, because it's like, but even approve is sort of like too positive. It's too like, this is better than that. It's better, but strictly from the way it looks, strictly from the way it's presented to me. Like you might, like, let's say you're reading an essay that's really crappy, like it's really boring, like Kant, it's like horribly written. It's very technical. It's very dry. There's a lot of jargon. You really don't like it. So you would say like aesthetically, that's a boring essay. And then you read another essay that's very well written and very like persuasive and very like fun to read and very entertaining. But then like you're like, well, what's the first essay about? The one that you didn't like? What's that one about? And you're like, well, it's about, like this thing I agree with. I actually like this thing. This is actually a truer essay. But you said the second essay was more fun and you liked reading it. You thought it was interesting and had good examples. Yeah, but it was full of shit. Sorry for the French, but like, so you might say like, okay, if you're asking me which is the better essay, strictly in the sense of being a piece of writing, you might say that the first essay is not the best essay. It's actually a worse essay because it's boring, it's didactic, it's dry, and you would say the second essay is better, right? Because it's well written. But then, are we asking, is it good? Kant would say you're looking at the content. You're looking at not how the content is arranged, not how the content is presented, but what is it actually saying? And in that case, the worst written essay might actually be better because it's saying something true or real or good or whatever. So, but beauty is something detached. Hence we have these interesting illustrations which were very popular. Kant actually, before he died, this is pretty rare in these days, but before he even died, he was able to enjoy a bit of acclaim, and his theories were pretty influential before he passed away in 1804, I think. And so, but by the end of the 18th century, by the end of the 1700s, you've already got people writing these books on art, on how to properly appreciate works of art. And so this is a little lithograph illustration that I got from one of these books I found online. Proper ways to appreciate art. The first on the left, you see these two gentlemen here looking at the sculpture, and they're very calm, and they're just looking at it, maybe talking about how it's well proportioned, and all the sort of things that are good about its aesthetic appeal. And the second one, which doesn't seem all that rowdy, but I guess like for the 1700s, like they're all like, they're gesturing and they're getting excited, and they're having this emotional reaction, and that's bad, right? That's not good. You have to be sort of detached, disinterested, look at it as a purely aesthetic object and just enjoy it in this very critical, detached way. And so this is very Kantian, I think. And you could say Hume, there's a little bit of this in Hume, because he does warn us about our prejudices, and that we have to be unbiased, and we can't get too all, you know, if we hate the artist, we might not like be objective about how good of an artist they are, and things like this. So this is along the lines of Hume, but this is very modern. This is the modern period, and very different from Aristotle and Plato. I mean, Plato would probably like this, but Plato thought art was bad because of the stuff on the right. These two guys on the right getting all rowdy. You know, this is the typical response, that art elicits all these emotions from the spirited, emotional part of our soul, and that's no good. That gets in the way and clouds our judgment. Now, ironically, Aristotle says yes, but no. Yes, it does that, but no, it's not a bad thing, right? Aristotle, art does touch our emotions and makes us have this catharsis, and it clears our minds so we can be more rational. But now we've got this sort of, I mean, in a way, he's almost a compromise, you might say, between Plato and Aristotle. Kant is, because he's like, well, you know, art is good for the intellect. So I guess that's anti-Plato. Art is good for your mind, but you have to enjoy it in this very detached way. You know, you can't get all rowdy and scream, and you know, if you're in the mosh pit slam dancing to Slayer, then that might be satisfying, that might be gratifying, but that's not merely pleasing, right? Like, merely pleasing, right? That's not beauty. That's not beauty for Kant. So what is taste? I guess this is sort of an answer to Hume. Um, you know, for Hume, taste is just, you know, based on our senses and what pleases us. But for Kant, nah, it's he says, the faculty of judging of an object or a method of representing it by an entirely disinterested satisfaction or dissatisfaction. The object of such satisfaction is called beautiful. If it doesn't do this, then it's not beautiful. Okay, so it's an entirely disinterested satisfaction. Now, this is still pretty vague, though, because it's kind of like, all right, well, what the heck does the beautiful do? If it doesn't please us in the way that ice cream pleases us, or canary wine, as he's going to talk about in the next slide, how does it please us? And in a way, he'll give us an answer, and you might disagree with it, but in a way, I think that this is definitely a one-up on Hume. Hume just kind of says it just does. You know, he says, well, things just please us. And, well, why? Because they just do. Because we're just designed a certain way to be pleased by them. I don't know. Because the way the human is made, we like stuff certain ways. That's just, and in general, most people like this kind of thing, so we think it's the best. But Kant's going to try to provide an answer for, no, what is it? What happens to us that makes us all approve or disapprove of certain things? And again, you might not agree with his answer, but you got to give him credit for at least attempting an answer. So more on this, right? That and I think I've already kind of mentioned this, that the beautiful for Kant, and maybe we don't mean it this way anymore. Maybe we don't use this word the same way anymore. Maybe what is beautiful has changed, and the concept of it has changed. Maybe in the 1700s, this was, you know, people only use this word beautiful. You know, like the word awesome, I think, is one that is overused. People talk about, that was awesome, that movie was awesome. Awesome used to be a lot more rare of a term. I think Eddie Izzard used, I think he's the comedian that used to make a joke about that. It was a really fun gag where he's talking about the overuse of the word awesome. He's like, look, man, like we got no word to say when we see like this really great thing now. It's like people say a burrito is awesome, and that's not that, you know. So beautiful, maybe beautiful meant more back then, is sort of my point. But he's saying that when we say something's beautiful, we don't just mean subjectively. We're like, when we say that was a beautiful symphony, that was a beautiful work of art, we're not just saying for me, beautiful to me. We're expecting others to have the same experience, and if they don't, they lack taste. So that's, you know, maybe we're wrong about that, but for Kant, that's how we experience it. That's what our mind is doing. That's the kind of judgment we're making. We're saying this thing is something that everybody else would say is beautiful, not just for me. So this is a long quote. I probably won't read the whole thing. I'll probably be end up paraphrasing half of it, but let's jump in. This explanation of the beautiful can be derived from the preceding explanation of it as an object of an entirely disinterested satisfaction, for the fact of which everyone is conscious, that the satisfaction is for him quite disinterested, implies in his judgment a ground of satisfaction for all men, right? So since this satisfaction is not tied to my own personal, like, I find that pile of dark chocolate enticing because I like chocolate, or it's not tied to some concept, then it's got to be something that's not just in me. It's something that it's a ground for judgment in all people, all men, as he puts it, all human beings. For since it does not rest on any inclination of the subject, and since the person who judges feels himself, back up. Sorry about that. Feels himself quite free as regards the satisfaction which he attaches to the object, he cannot find the ground of the satisfaction in any private conditions connected with his own subject, and hence it must be regarded as grounded on what he can presuppose in every other person. Consequently, he must believe that he has a reason for attributing a similar satisfaction to everyone. This universality cannot arise from concepts, for from concepts there's no transition to the feeling of pleasure and pain. Consequently, the judgment of taste must claim validity for every man, without this universality depending on objects. That is, there must be bound up with it a title to subjective universality. That's the word I was trying to remember earlier. I think I said subjective objectivity or something, but no, that was a weird enough word already. Subjective universality. So it's subjective in the sense, when I experience beauty, it's subjective in the sense that it's my mind that is judging something to be beautiful. It's something going on. It's something that appeals to me, but it's universal in the sense that any other mind, any other rational being would have a similar experience. It doesn't depend on my inclination, my desires, or a preconceived notion. And this section here where he says this universality cannot arise from concepts, for from concepts there's no transition to the feeling of pleasure and pain. Okay, so because this is a very direct, when I look at that, like, let me back up to the slide with the flowers, right? When I look at all these flowers arranged in a certain way and I find them beautiful, I'm not pausing and saying, whoa, wait a minute, that fits this thing that I had already thought about. It's beautiful. No, it's just a very direct, unreflective experience. It doesn't refer, as he puts it, to a concept or some category. I wasn't just walking and, my whole life I've been waiting for this particular arrangement of flowers to present itself to me. And then all of a sudden, bam. Yeah, Andrew in the chat box said instinctual. I think Kant would be careful to use the word instinct, but I think you're right. Like, I would definitely use it here. It's just, maybe intuitional. I think Kant would probably prefer the word intuition, although he uses intuition in a super broad sense. But yeah, it's sort of like it's an intuition. It's not a reflection. It's not something that you're like intellectual. If it were that, you would be easily able to explain it to somebody else. You'd be able, oh, here it is. This is why it's beautiful. But since you can't do that, Kant says, it's just a direct. It's a direct reference to the feeling of pleasure and pain, of the representation of the way the thing appears to you. Okay, appears to your senses, I guess. So a little bit more on the pleasant. He's gonna, I guess, recap a bit here. He says a bit more about the pleasant, more about the beautiful, and more about the good. And then we can actually start to get into really what the beautiful does and what makes it so unique, and why, even though there's no category for it, it almost defies categorization. It does defy categorization for Kant. But there is something very specific about what it does to our mind in experience. again, when we get there, you might push back and say, I don't think that Kant's right about this. But he's going to say this is it, right? When we say something's beautiful, this is what's going on. And I certainly think he's onto something, right? To be fair to him, I gotta put my cards on the table. I do think he's onto something. I think surely part of aesthetic experience definitely involves what he's tapping into here. But when we talk about the pleasant, right? So let's recap a little bit. When we talk about the pleasant, he says everyone is content that his judgment, which he bases upon a private feeling, and by which he says an object of an object that it pleases him, should be limited merely to his own person. So he's quite contented if he says canary wine is pleasant, and another man corrects his expression, reminding him he ought to say it's pleasant to you. So when we say, I like chocolate, I like red wine, I like lamb chops, whatever. Actually, that all sounds really good. Maybe I'm gonna have some lamb chops with red wine and chocolate for dessert for dinner tonight. Not much of not a very Halloween meal, but that's something that I like. I know not some people don't like wine, some people don't like lamb chops, some weirdos don't like chocolate, I guess. But that's my own personal taste. And this is where Hume kind of starts. This is where Hume starts his essay, and he's like, well, this presents us with a conundrum, because it seems like no one can be judged for their own taste. Like, you like it, you don't like it, it's your choice. You can't help but like what you like, and no one should judge you for that. But then there's this other intuition that says, but no, wait a minute. Some guys have good taste, some guys have bad taste, some women have good taste, some women have bad taste. It seems like there is a standard. And Hume tries to resolve that. We saw how he did it, but for Kant, it's, I think, more easily resolved. I honestly think Kant does it better. It's not as it's hard to explain, and Kant, his language is a lot more complicated. He's not the best writer, but I think his way of resolving this opposite paradox between, well, everyone has their own taste, and then at the same time, no, some things are better than others. Beyonce is a better singer than that drunk dude slurring in the microphone. How do we resolve that paradox? And I think Kant does a good job of it by divorcing the pleasant from the beautiful. So he says, I'm gonna skip this quote, right? But he says, to deride somebody for their taste, he says, is bad, right? Like, in that sense, everyone to each their own. Everyone has their own taste. But the beautiful is different, though, he says, right? The beautiful, he says, it'd be laughable if a man who imagined anything to his own taste and thought to justify himself saying, this object, the house we see, the coat that person wears, the concert we hear, the poem submitted to our judgment, is beautiful for me. For he must not call it beautiful if it merely pleases him. Many things may have for him charm and pleasantness. No one troubles himself on that. But if he gives out anything as beautiful, he supposes in others the same satisfaction. He judges not merely for himself, but for everyone, and speaks of beauty as if it were a property of things, right? It's not just subjective. It's something in the object that's causing me to have this experience, to have this response. Hence, he says the thing is beautiful, and he does not count on the agreement of others with this, his judgment of satisfaction, because he has found this agreement several times before, but he demands it of them. He blames them if they judge otherwise, and then denies them taste. So this is an interesting point he makes at the end, which I think he kind of glosses over, but let's pause here a minute. He says, hence this person, let's say he goes to see the concert, and he says, man, that violinist, she was amazing. I've never heard that Beethoven concerto play with such passion and just such feeling. I mean, she just blew me away. We got to go see it again. They're playing 2 more performances this weekend, right? It's beautiful. It was just earth-shattering. When we say that this is beautiful, we don't count on the agreement of others with this, his judgment of satisfaction, because he has found this agreement several times before, but he demands it of them. Okay, so it's not like I've seen this concert before, a million times before, and I've seen others encounter it before. It's a completely unique experience. And yet, even though it's completely unique and not a universal, right? That one performance by that one violinist that I went to go see of that Beethoven concerto was so amazing. I've never heard Beethoven's violin concerto played with such passion, etc. That was a one unique event. It wasn't a series of, you know, the universal, you know, concept, but yet I'm according a universality to it. I'm saying if you go see this performance, you also will be blown away. And I'm going to blame you if you judge otherwise. What? Were you listening? Were you on your phone half the concert? Come on, pay attention. You have no taste. This sort of thing, right? This is how our judgments of beauty work out in our mind. This is what beauty means to us. Now, again, the good, not the same as the beautiful, right? He's going to sort of thumb his nose at Plato. In respect of the good, it is true that judgment make rightful claims to validity for everyone. So there's a similarity here, right? Just like the judgment of beauty is supposed to be true for everyone, and the judgment of good is assumed to be true for everyone. When we say something, you know, a circle is a good circle, a triangle is a good triangle, it's well drawn or whatever. This is universal, but the good, he says, is represented only by means of a concept as the object of a universal satisfaction, which is neither with the pleasant nor with the beautiful. So again, it fits a universal satisfaction. In other words, it fits a universal conception of what is correct for that instance. If it's a good pair of shoes, for instance, what makes it good? They fit well, they're comfortable, they don't fall apart, they're well constructed, right? They don't just fall apart after you wear them for a month. They, you know, whether or not they're beautiful is another question. You might have some shoes that look beautiful, but they're not very well made, and they fall apart, or they're horrible to walk in, they're very uncomfortable, or something like that. So these are completely different types of judgments for Kant. Beauty is something completely distinct. So the beautiful is not the good, and the good is not the beautiful, says Kant. Okay, so let me see how we're doing on time, because I think I want to skip this next side. Yeah, let me skip this, because we got about maybe 20 minutes to kill before we take our break. And honestly, this is a lot of, you could argue, hair splitting with Kant. You can read my PowerPoint on Blackboard if you want to get all the details, especially if you're writing a paper on Kant. You might go back and do that. But let's see this, and let's look at this next quote, right? What is the concept of beauty? And we're going to find out there really isn't one. It's not one of those categories. We talked about Kant's categories last weekend, how for Kant, we're not just perceivers, and we're not just minds either. We're minds that have perceptions. And so we have these inputs, we have these perceptual inputs, and our mind uses what he calls the categories, the understanding that we have of these concepts, to organize our experience. We make coherent sense out of our lives, out of our day-to-day moments. We have a sort of understanding of where we're at and what we're doing. Maybe not even thinking about it, but we have enough of an understanding to operate and to go about our day. What allows us to do that, says Kant, is our conceptual framework. We have a conceptual framework, all humans, and it's the same in all of us. This is something that, you know, could be disputed. We all have we have 12 categories of understanding. Kant gets very specific about it. But beauty is not something that fits into that nice, the nice sort of, you know, the categories of understanding, that sort of nice framework. It somehow eludes that framing. It sort of goes beyond that framing. It exceeds our capacity to limit it to some one way of conceptually framing it. So let's read the quote here and see, let's see what he says to try to explain this. If we judge objects merely according to concepts, then all representation of beauty is lost. So if we try to conceptualize it, if we try to use the categories to explain beauty, we lose it. It sort of dissipates. It almost, it destroys the beauty. Thus, there can be no rule according to which anyone is forced to recognize anything as beautiful. Hence why I can't explain to you why something's beautiful. You just have to go see it yourself. Okay? We cannot press upon others by the aid of any reasons that a coat, a house, or a flower is beautiful, and yet If we then call the object beautiful, we still speak in a universal voice. This is very mysterious, even for Kant. He's like, how does this work? How can we be making this assertion that we think is universal? If I say something's beautiful, what I mean is, come see it. You're going to think so too. Look, it's beautiful. Look, right? But yet it doesn't fit a concept, which is the only thing we have. Our experience is unique to us. Every one of us has our own experience. No two experiences are the same. My experience, you're all different. What makes us the same is our concepts, says Kant. Again, this is controversial, but we all have the same categories. We all have a mind, and we're all organizing our experience with the categories. So this is kind of weird. How can there be something that we call beautiful, and yet it doesn't fit these categories? It's considered universal, yet it doesn't fall into the only thing that is universal between us as human beings. Well, we may see now that in the judgment of taste, nothing is postulated but such a universal voice in respect to the satisfaction without the intervention of concepts. Concepts aren't involved, the categories don't come in, and thus the possibility of an aesthetical judgment can at the same time be regarded as valid for everyone. How is this the case, though? He still doesn't answer this. He's kind of leaving us hanging. Now we finally get the answer. I think I mentioned this last week. This is one thing. I'm a big fan of Kant. I can't say I'm a Kantian, but I do think his philosophy is fascinating. God was brilliant. He's fun to talk about. I think some people would disagree with that. I know there's a lot of Kant haters out there. I've met them in the philosophy departments. But this I mentioned last week. I think his writing, people dog on his writing till the cows come home. And I honestly think you can get used to it. It's not so bad. But one thing about it is he seems to just repeat himself over and over again and spend all this time on stuff that he's already explained pretty well. And it gets really redundant. And then when he gets to stuff that's like kind of interesting and important and new, he just kind of glosses it over. And I'm afraid that's kind of what he's doing here when he talks about the free play of the mind's faculties. So I'm going to have to expand a bit, I think, upon what he says here. There's a quote later on where he expands a little bit more, but this is our first introduction to this concept of the free play of the mind's faculties. So let me dig in here. Let me dig into this quote. This is probably, look how long this freaking quote is. We've got like 15 minutes before our break, and I almost have a feeling this is probably where we're gonna break at, is after this quote. But let's see how we can do. Let's read this the opening part here. If pleasure in the given object precedes, comes before, there would be a contradiction. For such pleasure would be nothing different from the mere pleasantness in the sensation, and so in accordance with its nature could only have private validity. Hence, it is the universal capability of communication of the mental state in the given representation, which must be fundamental and must have the pleasure in the object as its consequent. Wow, see, this is probably the most difficult quote I'm going to cover this semester. So yeah, definitely going to take a while to unpack this. Let's back up a bit. All right. So if the pleasure precedes the object, right? So the pleasure in the given object precedes, there be a contradiction. For such a pleasure be nothing but mere pleasantness. So if I'm having this this good time, I feel really good about something, like I'm really enjoying the movie because it's funny and it's making me forget about my troubles and my worries, then that's too late, right? Because I've already sort of I'm not disinterested. Okay, I'm not I've already gotten too much enjoyment out of that film to make a purely aesthetic judgment, right? So hence the universal capability of communication, right? The ability of me, the universal capability, the fact that I'm able to say this thing's beautiful and you know what I mean. You might not agree with me. You might say that's not beautiful. I don't think it's beautiful. I think you're wrong about that. But you know what I mean in this Kantian sense of beautiful. The fact that I can communicate that to you, this universal capability of the communication of the mental state in a given representation, it's a mouthful, must be fundamental and must have the pleasure in the object as its consequent. Okay, so there must be something in the object that is making me say it's beautiful. And what it is it's going to please, but it's not a pleasure that's just my pleasure. So what kind of pleasure is it? What is he talking about? If it's not a subjective, I mean, it's certainly going to be something that the subject's going to feel. but it's something that any subject, not just me and my taste and my own personal biases, but any subject is going to feel. So it only thus, but nothing can be universally communicated except for cognition and representation, so far as it belongs to cognition. For it is only thus that this latter can be objective. Only through this that it has universal point of reference. So only in the sense that I can explain things using the categories, using the concepts of the mind, the concept of understanding, as Kant would refer to them. That's the only way I can explain something to somebody in a way that they can understand it universally and objectively. If the determining ground of our judgment as to this universal communicability of the representation is to be merely subjective, in other words, it's conceived independently of any concept of the object, it can be nothing else than the state of mind. That's what he's glossing over, that phrase, the state of mind. Okay, I think one of the earlier quotes I read from last weekend referenced to a feeling or a total feeling. He glosses over this. Okay, but what we're talking about is not, oh wow, I ate that piece of chocolate and it was yummy in my tummy, right? It was good on my taste buds. No, there was something this thing did to my state of mind. It affected me psychologically, and it's going to affect you psychologically as well. And so it's independently of any concept, though, right? It's not anything that I can really tell you. You've just got to go see it for yourself. But it's going to make your mind do this. It's going to blow you away. It's going to make you think. It's going to be thought-provoking. And this is to be met with in the relation of our representative powers to each other, so far as they refer to a given representation. So as far as they refer a given representation, a given experience, a given situation that I'm engaged in. They refer to cognition in general, a general feeling, a general. What's a good word to use? I don't want to say state of mind. Disposition, I think, is even too strong of a word too. But when he talks about a relation of our representative powers to each other, he is not being very specific here. And what he's talking about, he will get more specific later. When he's talking about this relation of our representative powers to each other, he's talking about a free play of what he calls the imagination and the understanding. So when we see a work of art that's beautiful, when we hear a symphony that's beautiful, it is not something that we can categorize with our concepts, with the categories of the understanding for Kant. We try to, though, and we try to do this because it really makes us think, and we're like, what is it about that? That there's something about that. And our imagination comes to our aid, and our imagination tries to fill in, maybe this is the answer. Maybe this is how I should see it. Maybe this is how to interpret it. Maybe this is how to understand it. But that makes you think of this in a totally other light. And so there's no way to pin it down, but yet it makes our mind exercise. It's almost like calisthenics for the brain. You're just sort of, there's as he's going to say later, free play of the mind's faculties between the understanding and the imagination. This is what beauty is. And so if I experience a work of art as beautiful, I will have a different experience than you will, obviously, right? But what won't be different, what will be the same, will be that both of our minds will have this free play. So given your life experience, your imagination might be doing different things, and your understanding will be replying to that. Your understanding will be trying to encapsulate your imagination in some clear meaning or understanding or purpose, but you can't do it. And so you'll go see a movie that really makes you think about life and think about your life and think about your relationships with other people. And so you're going to be thinking about different things than I would if I saw the same movie, but we're both going to be having this going on in our head, right? The imagination, the understanding, this sort of free play between the two. So let me see. Let me look at my time here. I think I have time for one or two more quotes here, and then we can take our break. In fact, actually, this next slide is a really good place to start because sort of we can recap where we left off. So let's end on this one, and then we'll take our break and come back and finish up Kant if we can. So he asked, does pleasure precede judgments of taste? Probably not for Kant. Right? It's almost simultaneous, I would say, at the same time, right? You see the object of beauty, free play of the imagination and understanding, okay? But if there's pleasure and then there's a judgment, that seems to be interested, too much tied up to your interest. So this merely subjective aesthetical judging of the object or of the representation by which it is given precedes the pleasure in the same and is the ground of this pleasure in the harmony of the cognitive faculties. But on that universality of the subjective condition for judgments of object is alone based the universal subjective satisfaction bound up by us with the representation of the object that we call beautiful. But beauty, without reference to the feelings of the subject, is nothing by itself. Okay, so in a certain sense, again, this is probably another super duper confusing quote. In one sense, you might say yes to this question. In one sense, you might say no. Does pleasure precede? No, I'm not going to have an aesthetical experience that merely pleases me, not in a gratifying sense, right? But in just a purely aesthetic sense, until I actually have something, an object out there, right? So the woman sniffing the flowers, right? She's not going to know that they have a beautiful smell until she actually freaking smells them, okay? But the smell was there waiting for her to partake in it, okay? And her mind was primed to have that experience. I don't know if this is a good example because I don't think Kant ever talks about smells as being beautiful. He certainly does talk about sound. So maybe the picture of the woman on the bottom jamming out with her earphones on is more appropriate. Okay, so yes, the pleasure, it didn't precede the representation. So in other words, the woman didn't start rocking out and having the music affect her until she put the earphones on and pushed play. But the possibility of that coming together was always there. Her mind was always primed for it. The music was designed in such a way to affect that response. Okay, so this is what makes an object beautiful. And this is kind of, in a way, this is what I like about Kant, because oftentimes we do, I think, speak about things that are beautiful that aren't really physically beautiful, or visually beautiful, or even they don't smell beautiful or sound. Like for instance, you might go see a movie that makes you really sad, or a very disturbing movie. Maybe it made you feel kind of uncomfortable and unsettled about something, a social issue, or a way of life or a way of living, and it made you reflect on that. Now, if we were using Kant's aesthetics, I don't know if we'd be able to make a judgment about beauty on that film. Oh, it's a beautiful movie. Because could we say that it satisfied you in the way that a nice, healthy, good, a tasty meal would satisfy you? It actually might have made you feel unpleasant. And that's why maybe this distinction between pleasant and beautiful, maybe it is appropriate. Maybe there are some movies, some films, some like a Shakespeare play. If you go watch a Shakespeare play, like a tragedy, it might be very unpleasant, but it's still a beautiful work of art, right? Still, and why is that? Thought provoking, right? Thought provoking, and so that's part of art, right? Is sort of, again, this free play of the imagination and the understanding, right? This at least maybe not all art is this way. But certainly some of it is, and sometimes that's what makes it art. Sometimes that's what makes it beautiful. Someone said in the quotes in the chat box they thought the Joker movie was beautiful, but there wasn't really anything beautiful in the movie. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'd use the word beautiful to describe it, but I see where you're coming from. I thought it was very well done. I saw it a lot later than most of you saw it. Most of my friends saw it in the movie theater. I didn't see it until they started streaming it on. I think HBO had it like a couple months ago, and I was able to stream it. I thought it was a very well done movie, and I would say it definitely fits Kant's. At least my experience of the film fits Kant's definition of beautiful because it made me think. I mean, if you've been to some of my meetings, my monthly extra credit meetings, the one we just had a couple weeks ago, you probably know how cynical I am about the world around us. So like, I didn't watch the Joker thinking like, oh wow, the world's really messed up. It's kind of like in this movie. Like I kind of already knew the world is kind of going there, but I thought it was a very well, a lot of movies when they try to present that sort of thing, they come off real, um, cartoony and I don't know. I thought it was very effectively done. It did to me. Of course, my sister totally disagrees with me on this. She thought it was she didn't like it at all. She thought her boyfriend's kind of in the middle, but I thought it was very effective. It seemed pretty realistic, despite the fact it's about a guy who's a cartoon character, comic book character. I thought it was a pretty gritty realism and dealt with issues of mental health in a pretty gritty, thought-provoking way. So I don't know, but that's my quick review of the Joker film or whatever. But let's see, we're at 120. Why don't we take 15? I need a quick snack. I didn't really get a good breakfast this morning, so let's take 15 minutes and we'll start back up again at 1:35. I was watching this clip on YouTube a while back, and it made me think about Kant. Oddly enough, so I'm gonna play you this clip. Um, this happened when I was really a little kid, so I remember when this was going on. I was like 5 years old, or I was really young. This is in the 80s, and there was this group called, and I think they're referred to in this clip. I'm just gonna play you like a minute or two, but there was this group called the PMRC. I can't remember what that stood for. It was like parents, something to do with basically censoring or music. They were the ones that it was a big group, lobbying group that went to Congress, and they were able to pass laws in the 1980s that made all the record companies had to start putting labels on the album covers that said, parental advisory, explicit lyrics, and warning parents about the naughty things that were in their music. And so they had all these rock stars coming to Congress and musicians, and it was quite a show. And this clip that I'm going to show you is actually, he's the singer from a band who I'm not a huge fan of, I gotta say. He's a smart guy. Dee Snider is the guy's name, but he's a singer for Twisted Sister. You probably never heard of Twisted Sister, but they had a huge hit in around this time of the video. You probably hear on the radio still today. We're not gonna take it. No, we ain't gonna take it. That's Twisted Sister. Okay, so I loved that song when I was 4 or 5. There was like a video on MTV with this guy Dee Snider, breaking into this. I think the kid's dad was yelling at him, and Dee Snider broke open the door and said, "We're not gonna take it." And the kid started rocking out and goes outside. "Screw you, Dad! I'm in rock and roll." So like the parents didn't like this stuff, and so this clip I'm going to show you, it's interesting. Yeah, they did Come On Feel the Noise. Yeah, they did. Yeah. So you're familiar with Twisted Sister. All right. So some people have heard of them. Okay. So anyway, this clip that I'm going to show you, I think Dee Snider is a Kantian. I think he actually his defense, he's being asked, this is funny, you're going to see Al Gore, a very young Al Gore, questioning D. Snyder, because Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, she was like one of the main drivers behind this whole censorship. She was, I think, the president of the PMRC or something like that. So he was obviously, you know, kind of out to get this guy. But like I said, I found this, they have the whole hearing on YouTube, but I found the clip that I was looking for earlier. So let me show you if I can. Okay. I'll just play a minute or two of it.
Professor, we can't really hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it?
Yeah, I think it's coming from. I don't know. I don't think your screen share does an audio share.
Oh, that sucks. Oh, it said. It says. Oh, just do closed captions, I guess. Oh, geez, that kind of sucks. That defeats the purpose. I guess I could. I don't know if it has closed captioning though. Oh, it does. It looks like it's working. That really sucks. I wonder. Let me see if I can change the settings here. Let me see. Screen share. We go back to it. Let's see. Dock to bottom. No, that's not it. It was 1628 or something. Oh man, I wish I could. I wish I could hear the audio. It sucks, but and the closed captioning kind of sucked too. But that was pretty close. But the point he was making, uh, it sounds like the internet piracy video. I'm not familiar with that one, but yeah, I think you were getting the audio that I was hearing. So you were getting like my speaker's computer to my microphone or something like that. I don't know how to change the settings, but basically, I've never heard the song he's referring to. But apparently, Al Gore had a a lyric sheet of Twisted Sister lyrics and said this song Under the Blade. It's about somebody tied up and getting cut, and that's this sounds like and basically D. Snyder's response was, I wrote this song about my guitar player. He was in the hospital. He was afraid of going in for surgery. I told him I'd write a song about it. It's just about this experience of fear and fear of hospitals and fear of surgery. And Al Gore's like, well, it's not a big stretch of the imagination to to see bondage, or and he's like, it isn't. But he's like, everybody's going to bring your own experience, your own imagination, your own dreams to the lyrics. You're going to sort of infuse that in, and everyone's going to be different. And so, and he said, there wasn't a reference to bondage in the song. There wasn't a reference to sadomasochism in the song, so like, in a way, he was kind of making a swipe at Miss Gore, Al Gore's wife. She seems to be interpreting it a certain way, but I wrote it about a hospital. So to be fair to Gore, I think he probably, I haven't sat down and wrote the lyrics to the song, but I'm imagining they were written in a vague enough, general enough sense to where he probably meant them to be open to interpretation in a very risky kind of way, right? I mean, that's, it's heavy metal, you got to be kind of out there, edgy or whatever. But no, but like his answer to Gore is completely Kantian. It's perfectly Kantian. It's just, this idea of like, yes, like I made this lyrics, but what you take from it, the way you interpret it, there's all sorts of, and it's your imagination that's doing that, right? It's you're the one that told me it's about this. I wrote about that, and that's fine. He's actually completely okay with that. But anyway, let me get back to the slide, right? So art involves the free play of the mind's faculties. Okay, we're going to say a little bit more about that, and then we're going to get into Kant's notion of purposiveness without purpose, because he's going to say that when we see something beautiful, the reason it does this to us, the reason that it makes our mind react in this way, is because it presents us with purposefulness without purpose. Okay, so I know that phrase is quite obscure. He'll explain here in a minute. We'll get to it. But this is what we're seeing when we see art. It seems to have a purpose, but it doesn't. I guess maybe that's one way of putting it. But let's read this slide. This is right where we left off. The judgment of taste independently of concepts, right? So we're not using some universal concept. It's not like this song "Under the Blade" means bondage. It's about a naughty man tying people up for sexual gratification. I wrote it about some hospital, dude. My guitarist was getting surgery, right? So it's independent of concepts, right? It's not the concepts or how you interpret it, but this judgment of taste determines the object in respect of a satisfaction and of a predicate of beauty. When we say something's beautiful. Therefore, that subjective unity of relation can only make itself known by means of a sensation. Okay, so obviously, right, I've got to smell the flower to know it's beautifully, this fragrance is beautiful. I have to hear the music to know if it's, beautiful music. But an objective relation can only be thought so far as it's subjective according to its conditions. It can be felt in its effects on the mind, and of a relation based on no concept. No other consciousness is possible than that through the sensation of the effect, which consists in, okay, so this is the effect of the object of beauty. It consists in the more lively play of both mental powers, the imagination and the understanding, when animated by mutual agreement. Okay, so the imagination and the understanding, that which we use to picture all the possibilities, we picture things, the imagination, and that which we use to understand things and organize things and conceptualize things. Those two aspects of our mental faculties, our mind's faculties, are having this mutual agreement, this interplay. They're animated by this. The beautiful is that which pleases universally without requiring a concept. That's the mystery of it. It's a universal satisfaction, and yet it's not something that can be conceptualized in some universal concept. Why are the lights on 59 beautiful? Are they there for a purpose? I guess the lights, this photo, for those that hear, I'm assuming most of you taking this class live in Houston, or at least have lived in Houston at one point in your life, and maybe you've driven down the Southwest Freeway at night when it's all lit up like this. And last time I went there, like, a lot of lights were broken. It kind of sucked. It was, my friend was all impressed because he'd never seen them before. And I was like, actually, it's kind of lame because like some of the lights are out and they need to replace them, But why is this thing beautiful? Why is this a beautiful looking bridge or light show, it's not because of the use of it. It's not useful. It doesn't fit some preconceived notion of how bridges should be constructed. In fact, it's almost, you know, the arches, the sort of the curvature and all that stuff, it could have been made any other way. In fact, this is completely unlike many other crossover bridges. All the other ones are usually very unaesthetic. They got the chain link fences, and it's just sort of a walkway and almost looks like scaffolding that's barely been built up, right? But, you know, here we have, you know, this aesthetically pleasing thing, and it's pleasing. Why? I can't explain it. Just go look at it. It just is. It's pretty, I guess we could say. Doesn't have a purpose, but it seems to, though, in a sense. It seems to be right. Like the way that it was, the way that the freeway is illuminated by the lights, and the way the lights change, and it just seems like it fits the environs. It fits just right, even though it wasn't really made for a use besides just looking at and enjoying aesthetically. So he's going to talk about purpose, this notion of purposiveness without purpose. But first, some general remarks on purposiveness itself, just in general. The purpose of an object, the purpose is the object of a concept. So when we think about the purpose of something, there's always a concept. What's the purpose of a light? To light up a room so I can see and I can walk through it, okay? What's the purpose of a sign? To point you in the right direction, okay? There's, you know, direction, illumination. These are all things we can understand rationally, we can conceptualize. So the purpose is the object of a concept insofar as the concept is regarded as the cause of the object, the real ground of its possibility. And the causality of a concept in respect of its object is its purposiveness. The faculty of desire, so far as it is determinable to act only through concepts, in other words, in conformity with the representation of a purpose, would be the will. Okay, so when I'm acting according to my desires, so I want to make enough money to buy a car of some kind, right? Well, now I have to think about, okay, well, if I want to have a car that's this much, then I have to figure out what my budget is. You know, let's see, I should probably spend less money on this, less money on that. I need to make more money, so I should probably quit my job doing this and get another job getting paid more, whatever. All of this he's calling the will. I'm directed by a purpose, by an aim, okay? I'm representing myself, a goal, or a telos, to use Aristotle's words. But he says, but an object or a state of mind, or even an action, is called purposive, although its possibility does not necessarily presuppose the representation of a purpose. So there's exceptions to this. There's purposiveness where you don't have a goal, you don't have an aim, at least one that's apparent, but merely because its possibility can be explained and conceived by us only insofar as we assume for its ground a causality according to purposes. In other words, in accordance with the will, which has regulated it in accordance with to the representation of a certain rule. Okay, just like, you know, you're probably used to by now, Kant's jargon is, you know, almost just unfathomable. What the hell is he trying to say here? So most of the time, when we look for purpose and we find purpose, it's very clear what that purpose is towards. It's very much like Aristotle said, you know, the house exists because of all the steps that lead up to it, okay? And so if you understand what the end product is, in this example, the house, then you understand why the builder is doing what he's doing. Why is he building it? Why is he selecting that material instead of that material? Why is he using this tool instead of that tool? All of these have meaning and purpose insofar as you know the end product, you know the goal, you know where it's going towards. But Kant is saying here there's another type of purposiveness where that is not the case, where you don't really know that there's an end, but what there is, and I'll reread this line here, although it's not that helpful, but I'll try to explain it once I read it again. He says, but there's another kind of purposiveness where it's merely because its possibility can be explained and conceived by us only so far as we assume for its ground a causality according to purposes. So why did I picture these? Why did I pick these images here for this slide? Because I think the stone, what do they call these again? I used to know the freaking name of it, but what's it called again? It's just a rock sculpture, I think is what they call these. Uh, I don't know, a rock stack or rock sculpture. I don't know the art nerd term for it, but I heard that these are actually bad. Don't do this. If you go to the woods and you're hiking or something, and you're camping out, a rock totem. Okay, thank you, Winona. I heard they're bad for the environment. That the pebbles should stay in the stream. You shouldn't stack them up like this. It's actually bad for the animals. It's bad for the flow. Yeah, so I heard this is a bad thing to do. So don't do it. Apparently, like unless that's all BS and it's just sort of paranoia. But I tend to believe the scientists when they say stuff like this, if it's backed up by a credible source. And I know the reasons too. I don't really know the reasons, but it seems right. I guess irrigation purposes, whatever. But obviously, like just a bunch of rocks all stacked up there. That was not conceived. Like, I'm going to use his language. Sorry, I got to move all this stuff out of the way because the chat box is blocking my view of the quote. So we can see that it was conceived, right? Its possibility, the possibility of this rock totem, can be explained and conceived by us only insofar as we assume for its ground a causality according to purposes. So we know, we're assuming that this thing didn't just happen, this rock totem. Rocks don't just stack themselves up like this, all nice with the biggest one at the bottom and getting smaller to the top. Someone stacked them there. So there was something, right? It was, as Kant puts it, it was conceived, right? Explained and conceived as far as we assume for its ground, a causality. It was caused according to some purpose. Somebody thought it looked cool, I guess. In other words, as he puts it, in accordance with a will, which has regulated it according to the representation of a certain rule. So some person was looking at it and saying, geez, like, let me put this one on top of that one. Put this one, it looks just right. That looks just right. This looks a little too, just kind of figuring it out. What are they going to use it for? You're not going to use it for anything. You're just going to stare at it. Oh, that's cool. Rock totem. Actually doesn't look that cool. Especially if you realize it's not good for the environment. It's sort of like, geez, maybe that was fun, stacking it. It's kind of fun. It's almost like playing Jenga or something like that. But from a purely aesthetic standpoint, yeah, rock totems, I don't know. So there can be purposiveness without purpose, so far as we do not place the causes of this form in a will, but yet can only make the explanation of its possibility intelligible to ourselves by deriving it from a will. So in other words, I don't know why someone made this stack of rocks, but someone made it. I don't know why Calder made these hanging things. I remember when I was a little kid, I think my mom and dad took me to the Art Institute in San Antonio. I used to take, I was quite a creative little kid. Used to draw a lot. They would take me to art lessons and stuff. And I remember when I was at one of these, the Art Institute, and they had this mobile. It wasn't Calder, but it was just, one of these hanging things. And I just didn't get it. I was like, what is that? I was thinking of art like the Greeks, it's just imitation. Art is a copy. You draw a pretty picture of a tree. You draw a pretty picture of a dinosaur. That was my conception of art. So when I see this mobile, just this thing, this metal sculpture, whatever you want to call it, a mobile, just hanging, spinning. I was like, what is that? My parents were like, it's art. I was like, oh, what do you do with it? What is it for? It's not for anything, but obviously somebody hung it there. It didn't grow out of the ceiling like some stalactite or something like that. It was man-made. And so it was just there, and it was arranged a certain way for aesthetical reasons. From the point of view of reason. Thus, we can at least observe a purposiveness according to form. So this is formal purposiveness. They put the color there because it goes good with the other color. They balanced it here because they put the big rock on the bottom because it was the base for the totem, and you couldn't put the big rock on the top or else the thing would fall over. So it's a sort of formal purpose. without basing it on a purpose external to the art itself. So thus we can at least observe a purposiveness according to form without basing it on purpose, and remark in its objects, although only by reflection, only through our thoughts. Okay, not through active engagement, not through using it as a tool or a device, but through actually just seeing it.
Professor.
Yeah, Hassan?
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I could really understand this idea of purposiveness without purpose, because going back on that rock stacking example, could it not be argued that the person who created the rock stack did it for a recreational purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, can we also assume that recreation is a purpose in of itself, because we know that people need to have recreation, otherwise they go insane. I mean, obviously, a rock stacking is not the only type of recreational activity, but it does fulfill that need.
Right, right. Well, I think what he would say is if I was stacking the rocks simply for that purpose, for like recreation, for fun, for amusement, then it probably wouldn't be a work of art, you know. And so maybe my example is just it's a bad example, you know. On
I
the
mean,
other,
like,
on the
it's just,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I mean, it's just like it still exists, you know, like it's a product
Right.
of your work, and like if it is, it just is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's why I kind of use that as an example, because it seems like the rock totem you're not going to use it for anything. Like it just sits there and you just look at it, you're like, that looks cool. You know, but I mean, like you're saying, when you're making it, the person making it, um, that's maybe another problem too, I think, is that Kant and Hume, they tend to focus on the observer, right? The person who's observing and partaking in the art. And it seems like, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems like the Greeks were more focused on the producer of the art. Although it gets complicated, I guess, when we think about Plato and how he says, you know, the person who uses the bridle knows it better than the person who makes it, or whatever the heck. But they always talk about art in terms of techne and craft, and, you know, art is bringing something forth. It's bringing something forth that's in the mind of the maker. Whereas, you know, modern art might not have that. You might have someone painting a canvas or making stacking rocks together, and they don't even have a goal in mind, right? So if you sit down to write a novel, for instance, let's say, you don't have every word in your mind. It's like every sentence that's going to be in that book is already in your head. No, you might have this vague feeling that you want to get down, you know, like I want to write a book about this experience I've had. I'm going to fictionalize it, but I've got some characters that I'm kind of sketching, and so you just start writing it, you know, and one passage might follow another or something like this.
I
And
mean,
when the book is, you know, you might say, well, the purpose there was to express yourself. Sure, but that's the purpose of the artist. Once the art is created, the only purpose of the art is to be appreciated aesthetically, at least for Kant, he would say.
I mean, it's like, but like the general idea behind the art still exists within the author and the painter. Like whenever Kafka was writing his books, like he obviously did not have everything planned out, but he definitely knew that it was going to be a work where everything goes wrong for the character, more or less.
Right.
So I guess like even if it doesn't exist perfectly, like the actual framework of it always does exist, more or less.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that Kant would probably just push back on that and say that it's always a work in progress until it's finished, and then it's done. And maybe Kafka would be this weird exception because he never really finished anything, right? So it's like he's kind of the oddball. In fact, he didn't even want anything of his stuff to survive. He asked his friend to burn all of his manuscripts on his deathbed, and lucky for us, his friend didn't do that. But there's actually some people I know who do not read Kafka except for the stuff that he published during his own lifetime out of respect for Kafka. But, you know, I guess that's pretty noble, but I can't do that. I just like Kafka too much. I got to read it all. But yeah, I'm trying to salvage Kant here a bit. It's the experience we're talking about, right? We're talking about judgments we make about objects that are beautiful. So maybe the artist himself, these comments you might sort of hold off on some of these critiques till we get to the genius, because he will talk about the genius. And it seems like what he's saying about the genius is goes against what you're saying a little bit. You know, this idea that, oh, there's going to be a general game plan. You know, maybe not every sentence and every word. It's vague. It's not completely worked out. But like the author has, you know, they know what kind of book they're going to write. They may have like a general plot line or whatever. Like you said, Kafka knows that things are just going to keep going wrong for K or whoever the main character is. But I think this is another thing where it's like maybe that's only true in some cases, but not always. You know, I think that some artists might work, you know, like I know James Joyce apparently took him years to write Ulysses, because he kept rewriting and going over pages and pages and crossing this out and adding this sentence and changing it. And so some authors are very methodical about the way they write, whereas others are more intuitive, and they just sit down and they just write pages and pages and pages and pages and then just publish it, you know, with very little edits. And it's just very intuitive and kind of flows from them. And Kant's philosophy seems to privilege that second type, that it's more of a direct inspiration. It's not some conceptual thing that you visualize like some blueprint and then put down on paper. It's more of like a general, you know, feeling, or, you know, intuition, for lack of a better word, and it works itself out as you construct the work. As you put the paintbrush to the canvas, you do one brush stroke, and you might envision, hey, I think a little bit of blue is going to look really good over here. Oh crap, that doesn't look so good. You know what? Let me try a little darker blue. And so, and why? It's just because of the form for Kant. It's not because you like blue, it makes you feel good. It's not because the person you're paying the painting for prefers blue and you want to make sure to put blue because they're paying for it. No, it's just given the structure of the piece itself, given the way the whole framework and the form of it, that it doesn't work in this section. It's too distracting from the other elements of the piece. It needs to be balanced out somehow. And so there's purpose, I guess you could say, why you did what you did. Why did you put that sentence there instead of later on? But it's not for some particular use, like a tool is used to, you know, dig or something like that, or to garden with. It's just simply there to, like as you put it, just be, right? Just to be, and just to be enjoyed aesthetically. And that's what makes it enjoyable aesthetically, is that we as the perceiver, according to Kant, we as the perceiver, we can see that in the work. Even though we're not an artist, we kind of have an intuition about it ourselves. We're like, yeah, that is just right. Like they did just put just the right amount of blue in that top corner. Like, you know, we reflect on it. We don't know why, it just is. It's just right. It's some sort of, you know, unconceptualizable thing. So I'm skipping that slide here. Judgments of taste are a priori. I think we talked about the a priori, a posteriori distinction before when we were talking about Hume. I could be wrong about this, but so just in case, a priori, Kant thinks that the judgments of taste are a priori. In other words, they're going to be valid or true regardless of the context. So what's beautiful is beautiful, period. It doesn't matter like what culture you're from. It doesn't matter like what kind of mood you're in, what your personal biases are. If you're a rational agent, if you're a human being, it's going to be an a priori judgment. It's not a posteriori or based on experience, like David Hume's going to say. It's not something based on previous experience of other objects. So Kant thinks, and if you've ever taken a class in philosophy before, I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't studied Kant's ethics, especially if you've taken an intro to ethics class, you certainly have studied Kant. When it comes to ethical judgments, Kant thinks that those are a priori as well. That's pretty controversial, right? I mean, the fact that, ethical judgments are not based on the situation, they're not based on experience. Kant's going to say that you shouldn't even think about the consequences of your actions if you're trying to determine whether your actions are right or wrong, good or bad in an ethical sense, because he says you don't know. you don't know a priori what will happen. You can't predict the future, so you should always base your actions on just what's right, and you have to base it on principle. And so, so he says that moral judgments are a priori, right? There, you know what's right or wrong, regardless of the outcome, regardless of the individual situation, and that they're practical. So you can actually use them. Okay, that like Kant's moral imperative, he says you should always act in a way so that the principle of your action could be a universal law. That's one of Kant's moral precepts. He says, if you're going to give a reason for your actions, like for instance, if I'm going to lie, if I'm going to tell a lie in order to get some money, that's one of the examples that he gives. If I lie to my friend and I tell him I'm going to pay him back so I can borrow some money, he would say that's not right, because what's my principle? What am I saying? I'm saying, well, anytime I'm in need, I can lie. I can do whatever I want. And for Kant, if that was a universal principle and everybody lied whenever they needed something, then nobody could get away with lying. It wouldn't work. Okay. So, for Kant, ethics is always this way. Ethics always has to be a priori. It has to be applicable to every situation at all times. But on the other hand, it's practical. Aesthetical judgments are a priori. They're true at all times. What's beautiful is beautiful. What stimulates your imagination is going to stimulate your imagination no matter what. And what's beautiful is beautiful, right? What's right is right ethically. Yeah. Gerardo says the categorical imperative. Yes, that's what Kant calls his ethical law. It's categorical, so it's always true. It's not sometimes true, not always. It's not hypothetical. It's only true if this is true. It's categorically true, and it's an imperative. It's how you should act. And so that's why he calls it the categorical imperative. But I don't want to get too much into it because this is a class on aesthetics. But he says, so there is some similarity between ethical judgments and judgments of taste, judgments of beauty. The only similarity, though, is the a priori part. The fact that they are a priori. They're always true. What's beautiful is beautiful. What's good is good. It doesn't matter on my subjective opinion or anything like that. But he says aesthetic judgments are merely contemplative. They're not practical. Okay, they're still a priori. Okay, but they're not. When I see that something's beautiful, when I walk through this James Turrell tunnel at the MFA, when I say that's beautiful, it's something that is it's, as he puts it, a contemplative beauty. It's not beautiful because it serves a purpose to me or it's instrumentally good or anything like that. It simply affects me. It makes me think in a certain way. It affects my faculty of imagination and understanding. It has purposiveness without purpose. Okay, I think I'm going to skip this slideshow as well, or this slide in the PowerPoint as well, because it's sort of redundant. It's sort of, the judgment of taste, pure judgments of taste have to be detached, right? They can't be full of emotion. So when we see a movie that's charming or fun or, that, he would say, gets in the way of our ability to judge it from a purely aesthetic standpoint. And I would push back on this. I think when you're writing your papers, this is probably something you could write about if you want to take Kant to task. I mean, it sounds like Hassan, you've got a pretty good critique of him that, isn't it always instrumental? I mean, if you're Aristotelian, you can pretty much make a good argument about anything being instrumental, that there's always a purpose for anything, even just art, like, yes, it pleases you. That's its purpose, is to please you aesthetically. That itself is a purpose. That's the end. So, this idea that that's purpose without a purpose, no, its purpose is to be beautiful and to excite your imagination. It's not without a purpose. But I think, though, maybe to be fair to Kant, it's not purposeful in the sort of raw utilitarian sense. It's not an instrumental purpose. It's not I'm using it for the sake of something else. I'm just enjoying it for its own right, in its own, I like it. You said earlier, it just is. It's just sitting there, and it's being this thing of beauty. But But again, I want to push back a bit on this, like detaching emotion from it, because I think sometimes things that are works of art, I think Aristotle's got a bit of a point here. The whole point of a tragedy is make you sad. If somebody writes a tragedy and it doesn't make you sad, it wasn't very well written. It didn't really do its job. Sad movies are supposed to be sad. Funny movies are supposed to be funny. So if a comedy doesn't make you laugh, it's not a good comedy. I don't understand how you can make an aesthetical judgment about a comedy, that's pure in this sense. If you get like really, like if it makes you bust a gut laughing, that your stomach hurts so bad because you're laughing so hard, Kant would be like, that's just vulgar. You need to be detached and just you should like maybe a smirk, just very amusing, very clever, but like rolling on the ground laughing, that's not a purely aesthetic judgment for Kant. Color gets in the way too. This is interesting. Remember, for him, beauty is all about form. When we take the purposiveness without purpose, it has to do with how the parts of the object of beauty are organized. And so color, he says, is not that important. So maybe the example I was giving about painting a shade of blue is a bad example, but you get the point, I hope. But he says that colors and tones, they do have a right to be regarded as beautiful, but only insofar as they're pure. So if you're just looking at the color itself or the tone itself, but when they're sort of a part of another art form, when they're elements, right? It's different, he says. This is a determination which concerns their form and is the only element of these representation which admits with certainty of universal communicability. For we cannot assume that the quality of the sensations is the same in all subjects. In painting, sculpture, and in all formative arts, the delineation is the essential thing, right? The delineation. This photograph, all the lines are the same, right? They're all the same. This one's been colorized, right? Maybe by Ted Turner. That was a big movement in the 1990s. Ted Turner was colorizing all these classic movies, and everybody was saying it was just so awful. And it was, how dare you, keep them black and white, keep them how they originally were. You're blemishing the art. And the colorization it kind of sucked back then. They did it like in a really rinky-dink way. So I kind of saw that. I think maybe it's gotten a little bit better now with digital video editing stuff. But somebody asked, would comedy movies have to be universal since everyone has a different sense of humor? That's a very good question. I think that, as far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, it's been a while since I read the entire third critique, but I don't think Kant talks about comedy. And so I don't know how he deals with that. But that would present a problem. That would certainly present a problem. Like some movies might have jokes that you wouldn't get if you don't know. Like there's one of my favorite shows is for comedy is Portlandia. And I don't understand how Portlandia, I don't know if anybody's ever seen that show, but I'm sure some of you, there's a lot of people in this class, I'm sure some of you have seen Portlandia, but there's so many jokes in that show where I'm like, nobody would get that joke unless they're like my age. Like there's only a certain generation, like, I'm Gen X, like you have to have been born in a certain year to kind of get some of their inside humor. And so I think that, Kant would probably say those elements detract from beauty. Okay, so if the humor depends upon something that is contingent on the time, the culture, the period, that would be distracting. Just the basic form of it. Almost you could, in a way, this is a bit like Aristotle, what he said about the plot. When you look at the plot of a tragedy, you have to just get what's the basic plot line. Everything else you just have to add little elements, not too much, not too little, just to bring along the plot, right? And I think Kant is making a similar point about colors, tones, things like this. He says, no, it's the form, all these extra tones and subtones, and if you're doing these crazy, like, what's the musical term I'm looking for? Oh, geez, what's that scale? With all the different anyway, forget it. All this stuff is just window dressing, ornamentation, and distracting, right? The essential aspect of it should be the form, how the elements are organized together. Even getting the humor, it's more facepalm than LOL. Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, it's kind of like it's sort of if you're talking about Portlandia or whatever, it's sort of a comment on society or certain groups or cultures. Kind of like, oh, jeez. Um, but I didn't finish this quote. Let's see what else he says about colors and tones. He says that they don't admit of universal communicability, right? You might experience certain tones different than me, but the form is universal. That's what's fundamental. The delineation, as he puts it, is the essential thing. And here, it is not what gratifies in sensation, but what pleases by means of its form that is fundamental for taste. The colors which light up the sketch belong to the charm. They may indeed enliven the object for sensation, but they cannot make it worthy of contemplation and beautiful. So yeah, I guess again, if this image, is maybe this is a bad example of something Kant's talking about, but if this image is thought provoking, if it makes you think about who is this character, like why is she looks, is she serious? Is she angry? Is she sad? Is this sort of a seductive look? What is this? You're trying to sort of understand it. You don't need it to be colorized to have that experience. All you have to do is see the image itself. And in fact, the colors might distract from it, because when you see the black and white image, you see more of the emotion in her face, whereas maybe the color image, her hair is so red, like, oh, wow, redhead, that kind of the red hair kind of strikes you and might distract from that. So I think this is maybe the point that Kant is trying to make. Ornamentation, right? The frame, a golden frame, is sort of the example that he gives. This is not, essential to the experience of beautiful either. Those things we call ornaments, right? Those things which do not belong to the complete representation of the object internally as elements, but only externally as complements, and which augment the satisfaction of taste. They do so only by their form, as, for example, the draperies of statues or the colonnades of palaces. But if the ornament does not itself consist in beautiful form, and if it is merely used as a golden frame is used, merely to recommend the painting by its charm, then it is called finery, and it injures genuine beauty. Um, so yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example of this in art. I mean, he's using like a golden frame. You got a really crappy painting, but you put this really badass frame around it, so it kind of, oh yeah, see. Or maybe the frame is so gaudy, it's a really good painting, but the frame is so gaudy and it detracts from it. It's distracting. Kant does not approve of such things. I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know. Maybe you're watching one of your favorite TV shows, and they have some guest appearance by by Kanye West, and it's just like, dude, like, and it has nothing to do with the plot. It has nothing to do with they just were able to get him on the show, and they thought it would get ratings, so they just write this character in that's to make, you're like, it's distracting. I mean, I like the show, and I like, let's say you like the show and you like Kanye and you're fans of his music and you're fans of the show, but then they just write an episode just to have him in it as a guest. They're just doing that for ratings. It has nothing to do. It doesn't have anything to do with the plot. It has nothing to do with the characters. I can't think of any examples like this. I just made that one up in my head. But this stuff happens all the time. Where they'll just, they'll do something in a movie just because it'll get people to the box office, when it actually has nothing to do with the plot, or it's just sort of gratuitous or something like that. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to skip this as well. We're so short on time. Okay, I have to read this because Kant uses this term common sense, but he does it in a way that's different than what we might mean by common sense. It's not completely different, I think. I mean, I think that they don't cancel each other out, but he's a very peculiar understanding of what he means when he uses the term common sense. And what it really comes down to is this idea that when I experience something beautiful, even though I'm going to have my own experience, right? Like the Dee Schneider song, Al Gore and his wife thought it was about some sex thing. You know, that's just, it's vulgar. It's about tying someone up, and it's violent. And Dee Snider's like, no, it's just about going to the hospital, and it's exaggerated and kind of scary, but it's how you feel about that experience or whatever. But the experience of that work of art's going to be unique if you're Dee Snider, the Twisted Sister singer, who's all wild and crazy, or you're like the buttoned up Mr. Al Gore, I'm a senator from Tennessee. You're going to experience it differently. But what won't be different is it's going to provoke your imagination. And so that's the common sense. That's the common sense, the common reaction, right, I guess. And the fact that we assume that others will have a similar experience, that's the common part, right? So in all judgments by which we describe anything as beautiful, we allow no one to be of another opinion without, however, grounding our judgment on concepts, but only on our feeling, which we therefore place at its basis, not as private, but as a communal feeling. Now, this common sense cannot be grounded on experience, for it aims at justifying judgments which contain an ought. It does not say that everyone will agree with my judgment, but that he ought. So why is he going to say that this isn't based on experience? Well, I have not experienced the pizza the way that you've experienced the pizza. So I don't know how you're going to experience it. I don't know. I don't know how all of humanity is going to experience it, because I'm not all of humanity. I can't step outside of my head and become all of humanity experiencing this thing. Oh yeah, we would all have that same reaction, but I assume it regardless. So this assumption is not based on an experience, but on an assumption. I'm like, one does not simply not like pizza, right? These memes. I know that there's people out there that don't like pizza, or they think that pizza is overrated, and maybe it is. Maybe Hume is right. Maybe all of our ideas and our thoughts are based on subjective judgments. But Kant's making a point that we don't treat them that way. We treat it as, you didn't like that movie? You thought that movie was boring? Really? Like, I'm blown away. Like, I mean, I can see why you didn't like it, but to say it was boring, or I can see why you might not like this one character, what this character did, but to say that it was not well filmed, did we see the same movie? Like, it had great camera work. Maybe you didn't like the plot, but the camera work. So this is the way that we act. This is the way we consider things that are. It's like, I like Eric Reyes. I still haven't seen Inception, so I have a feeling I'll be right there with you, Eric. I have it on my watch list, but every time I go to watch it, they take it off. Like, it was on Netflix, and then they took it off. Then it was on HBO, they took it off. So it's like I've got it on my to watch list, but I have a feeling I won't like Inception. But yeah, everybody's like, they said the same thing to me about The Matrix when the Matrix came out. I never saw it till it'd been out. It was on video for like 2 or 3 years when I saw it, and I think the problem was it got so hyped up to me, and I have a feeling that the Inception will be the same. I'll be like, hey, it's alright, it's okay. Some people think it's really confusing. I think I'll be able to follow it. I've watched some pretty confusing movies, and I think I'll be able to deal with it. I don't know, like dream within a dream within a dream, that kind of stuff. But again, just to be clear, like what Kant is calling common sense here, not exactly the same thing that we mean usually when we say, yeah, I did like Memento. Yeah, someone mentioned Memento. I think Memento's maybe better than Inception. I don't know. We'll see. Aren't they both the same director? What's that guy, Chris Nolan or whatever? Anyway, but just to be clear, again, common sense is not like, oh, it's common sense to do this or that. No, common sense is this idea that, like anybody else, the common folk, anybody, me, myself, my friend, my neighbor, someone I haven't even met, anybody that watched this would be blown away by it. That's sort of the idea. So let's recap a little bit here before we get into, I think we're finally getting into the stuff on genius. No, we're not. I think I'm going to have to skip a whole lot here. Crap. Okay, well, let's do a super quick recap. In fact, I'm just going to read this darn thing, and then maybe the next couple slides, because I'm noticing it's already freaking 2:30. So let me go on for about another 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to try to come to a nice stopping point. and then we'll call it quits. Next week is going to have to be crazy. I think, well, you know what I'll probably do next week? They both, since Schopenhauer and Kant both talk about genius, I might use that. We'll talk about what Kant means by genius, and we'll segue into Schopenhauer. I don't know. I've got a week to plan it. I'll figure it out. But my original order still stands. Read the Schopenhauer chapter for next week. We'll definitely get to it, even though we still have so much left for Kant. I thought skipping 5 or 6 slides would help, but anyway, I think I'm having too much fun with this. So anyway, let's recap real quick. What do we mean by taste? Kant says that taste is the faculty of judging an object or a method of representing it by an entirely disinterested satisfaction or dissatisfaction, right? So again, we're not interested in it in the sense that we're going to use it for anything, or that it fulfills some preconceived notion of what it should be. So the object of such satisfaction is called beautiful. The beautiful is that which pleases universally without requiring a concept, right? So again, it's not something that I conceptualize. In fact, it defies conceptualization. It is the form of purposiveness of an object so far as it is perceived in it without any representation of a purpose. Again, purposiveness without purpose. The beautiful is that which, without any concept, is cognized as an object of necessary satisfaction. In other words, if you don't get something out of this, you're missing something. I mean, I assume that it's something that it's a necessary satisfaction. It's not, you might like red wine, you might not. No, I'm going to say this movie is freaking amazing. And if you don't think so, you don't have taste, or you just weren't paying attention, or you missed this part of it or that part of it. Something like this. This is the idea. Okay, this is a little bit more kind of elaboration on what's been said before, but I think it's helpful. So let me go ahead and read it. I'm going to start skipping around quite a bit now because we're running out of time. But he says, Kant's going to assert that when we have this aesthetic experience of beauty, this experience that involves the free play of our faculties, that's involved. It's unlike logical judgments. In logical judgments, when I make a logical judgment, when I'm in a, like, let's say I'm trying to learn a geometrical truth. I'm in math class and my teacher's trying to teach me about geometry. I'm usually going to be making logical judgments, and in that case, my understanding, my imagination is at the service of my understanding. Okay, so why would I say that? Why is my imagination at the service of my understanding? Well, in the math class, if my teacher is talking about a geometrical shape and all the different properties of it and saying, oh, well, for every triangle, if you look at the largest angle that's inside the triangle, the largest angle is always opposite the largest side. So I'm trying to understand that logically. I'm making a logical judgment. The largest angle is always across from the largest side. I'm trying to understand it. I use my imagination. I picture a triangle. I look at that triangle in my head. I'm thinking, oh yeah, the largest angle, largest side. Of course, this is going to work. Okay, so that's the normal order of operations, I suppose, right? I hate to say order of operations. They both work together, but the imagination is at the service of the understanding. Now, that's not the case here in aesthetical judgments of beauty. That is reversed. The understanding now is at the service of the imagination, right? The understanding, as he puts it, helps to facilitate this free play of the imagination. So, for instance, when I see that object of beauty in the art museum, I look at that painting, it triggers my imagination. I'm trying to figure out, like, what is it about that thing? It made me think, or maybe a better example would be a movie or a film. I watched that movie and, geez, it made me think about my life, and it made me think of my friend's life, and it made me think about society, it made me think about politics, it made me think about what am I doing and my relationship with my family. And and then like you're trying to sort of make sense of it, trying to interpret it, and like and your mind, your understanding is sort of giving you all these possibilities, you know, trying to say, well, maybe the artist was trying to tell you this, and maybe the artist was trying to say that, and your imagination is just sort of like going wild. I love this sort of this picture here, this painting. I couldn't find the artist, so I just had to sort of credit the whoever posted it, right, and put the web address. But it's kind of a cool little sketch. You know, you've got this young lady just sort of chilling out, right? She's having this Kantian experience of the beautiful, I suppose. You know, her imagination is uh, uh, having this free play, and I guess every once in a while the understanding will throw, you know, a star out at it, or a heart, or like some squares or whatever, and trying to organize it. But this is what we experience for Kant when we experience beauty. This is what the beautiful is, you know, is any object or property in an object that excites this free play of the faculties, as he puts it. Okay, I think I'm going to skip this this quote on repetition. He talks about how repetition can get in the way, just like colors are distracting. You know, a certain work of art can have too much repetition that it gets annoying. You know, like a song. That's one thing I don't like about pop music. So all these pop music, like they'll have like 5 lyrics in the whole freaking song, and it's just like, what's that freaking song by is it who did that song? The guys that wear the masks, DJ guys. Daft Punk, I think, is the name of the band, and they got that "Around the World" song. It's just that, to me, that song is the height of annoying. I'm sorry if you like it, but like, I kind of get it when he's like that. I think that's what he has in mind when he's talking about repetition, but on the flip side, there's other music that I like and I think is really great that's very repetitive. Like one of my favorite composers, probably my favorite living composer, is Philip Glass. And if you ever listen to like Philip Glass music, maybe I'll type his name just in case you're curious. Philip Glass. You might not like him. A lot of people think he is too repetitive and just, you know, really really annoying. But the thing is, it's very repetitive with very subtle changes. So you'll hear this, you know, violin, and then, you know, underneath it there's a flute, like, and it's just like, you know, you're sort of like 5 or 6 minutes later, it's a completely different sound, and you didn't even notice it changing, because the changes are so subtle. And so, yeah, Brian Eno's another good example of someone like this, very repetitive. You know, Brian Eno's solo work for sure. But yeah, so I think I'm kind of on the fence about this. I'm like, I know why he says it. You know, why repetition can get annoying and get in the way of this purely disinterested and just enjoying it. But I think sometimes repetition can actually do the opposite. You know, it can kind of put you in a trance and kind of make you let go, and it can completely make you, you know, this whole free play of the imagination take place. So I'm not going to read this quote. It's a long quote, but that's sort of, let's see, no objective principle of taste. I'm going to read this. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but I'm going to read this because we're almost out of time. Let's just read this, try to wrap this up. What's the next slide? How are judgments of taste possible? We're going to start there next time. But this idea that there's no objective principle of taste, what's Kant going to say about this? I must immediately feel pleasure in the representation of the object, and of that I can be persuaded by no grounds of proof whatever. Although, as Hume says, all critics can reason more plausibly than cooks, yet the same fate awaits them. They cannot expect the determining ground of their judgment to be derived from the force of the proofs, but only from the reflection of the subject upon its own proper state of pleasure and pain, all precepts and rules being rejected. Again, more kind of repetitive. I probably could have skipped this slide. Again, judges of beauty, and in a way he's in agreement with Hume on this. We can't explain them conceptually. I can't go to a museum, see this work of art, and bring that experience with me to you. All I can do is say it's beautiful, and then you've got to go and make that judgment yourself. And when you see it, you'll know, did it do this to me? Did it spark my imagination, this free play of my mind's faculties, or did it not? Did I just look at it and go, meh? Was it just I? You know, is that how it was? You know, he admits that Kant admits that critics can correct, they can extend our judgments of taste, but he says they do not thereby set forth the determining ground of this kind of aesthetic judgments in a universally applicable formula, right? So you can't put it in a formula. It's not something you can conceptualize. It's not some mathematical principle. For Kant, that's impossible. This is what the genius can do. I guess I'm sort of trying to segue here into next week and sort of previewing next week, right? You can't put it into a formula. That's what the genius is able to do, is to see it, to know that it's beautiful, and without being able to give a reason, I suppose. And the critic might be able to discern the beautiful as well. Maybe like Sancho Panza's kinsmen were able to discern the taste of metal and leather in the wine because they had a discerning taste. The critic is able to sort of pick this stuff out, but the genius is able to create based on not a rule, not some sort of rule, okay? Now, this is a lot to unpack, this idea of how judgments of taste are possible. This is a question Kant loves to ask. One of his most famous questions is, how are synthetic a priori judgments possible? He asks that question at the beginning of the first critique. He thinks it's the most important question of all philosophy. How are synthetic a priori judgments possible? And you probably like, what the heck is a synthetic a priori judgment? What the heck, too much to explain. We'll have to wait till next week. We'll do that at the beginning of class. But the point is, how is anything possible? How are judgments possible? For him, only through the understanding, only through the categories. I have inputs, I have senses, must have those. If I don't have any inputs, I don't have experience. But I also have to organize my experience. My experience is organized. I have understanding of who I am and where I am. And the reason I do is because my mind is able to make sense of all this stuff, all this infinite, all these infinite inputs. My mind is able to somehow deal with it and make sense of it. So how are judgments of taste possible? How is it possible for me to make a judgment that this thing is beautiful, meaning that someone else who I am not, another subjectivity, another person is going to have the same experience? How do I know that? I don't know it, Kant's going to say. I'll never know it. But how do I even assume it? How is it even possible for me to make that assumption? And this is sort of where we'll start, I guess, next week. And it's not a big, it's kind of a, to me, kind of question begging the way he answers it, but it won't take us that long actually to get through it. And it's a nice segue into Kant's account of the artistic genius, what makes somebody a genius, why they're a genius. And for him, the genius gives the rule to art. The genius doesn't follow a rule. He creates something beautiful, and that's what gives the rule to art. So anyway, we somebody asked this, I guess I'll have to end on this because we're already out of time, but Charles, you asked a great question. Kant is a big fan of the auteur theory, right? The idea that the auteur, the author, the guy that just, this is kind of a modern theory. I don't think that the auteur theory came out until like the 60s or something, okay? But I suspect he would. I suspect he would totally be for the auteur theory. The auteur theory, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically it's just this idea that you've got your Hitchcock, you've got your Stanley Kubrick, you've got, the director, he makes the movie, right? He's the artist, right? All the other underlings are kind of like, they are sort of bringing forth his vision kind of thing. And he's this masterful genius who sees this vision and puts it forth into this work of art. And I definitely can see Kant getting behind that. I can totally see him. That he's like the single creative force, as you put it, right? Definitely a Kantian. It definitely would fit into his philosophy. I mean, I can't speak for the guy, but I have a feeling he'd be definitely sympathetic to that view. Anyway, anybody else have any other questions, comments, points of clarification? I guess I'm going to go and end it on that. But just to repeat, next week, more Kant, a little bit more Kant, and almost all Schopenhauer and, his interesting idealism. To me, just to sort of give you a preview of Schopenhauer, I would say it's hard for me to pick. But if I had to pick one philosopher this semester, I'd say Schopenhauer is probably the most interesting. Uh, his theory of art is really, to me, fascinating. But ironically, I think his is the weakest. I think it is like the one I have the least, I think is the least philosophically strong. It's really interesting, but I don't know. I think we're gonna have fun with it, and I think it is useful. I don't want to completely diss on Schopenhauer, but we still have lots of Kant to cover. So I better sort of get my nose to the grind and figure out how the heck I'm going to grade your papers now that I've been kicked out of Turnitin.com. So that's the headache I'm working on now. So someone says, I noticed on Blackboard. Yeah, okay. The second essay, I mentioned this earlier, but let me repeat because I think this was like before some of y'all got here. I will post the topics for the second essay either before or after class, probably before class, like late in the week next week. And the paper will probably be due 2 weeks out, right? So like, I'll assign it next weekend, and you'll have like till the end of the week to turn it in or something like that. That's probably what I'll do. So we'll see how long it takes us to get through Schopenhauer, but that's looking like what it's going to go. I'll post the topics on Friday or Saturday next week, and you'll have a week or maybe a week and a few days to turn it in. Okay. All right. Anybody else got any other questions? No? Going once, going twice. All right, it's gone. All right. Well, you guys have a good week. Sorry for all those technical difficulties last week. We're slowly catching up, sort of, kind of. But happy Halloween. Don't eat too much candy and get sick, right? But I'll see you guys later. Be careful.